This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted that the scientist Gautam Desiraju has joined me today. Dr. Desiraju requires no introduction. He's been on Global Order before. Today, we're going to discuss something really critical with him. Critical minerals, as it were, rare earths to be very specific. In April, China restricted the supply of 7 key rare earths, and as a tit-for-tat measure to Donald Trump's tariffs. Now, after that, there's been a lot of debate around the world on the supply of rare earths. China has actually a monopoly in some senses because it has a majority of the world's, at the moment, rare earth supply. There are, of course, other countries that have rare earths today, but China has the bulk of it. What's going to happen in this critical domain? Rare earths are used in everything from defense to our mobile phones. To discuss all of this and indeed India's position, Dr. Gautam Desiraju, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Hindol. I'm happy to be with you on Global Order once again. And as you say correctly, I have spoken with you before. I'm delighted to talk to you today about this topic about rare earths, which is of great current interest and economic significance for us in India today.
Let's begin. Thank you, sir. Let's begin by talking about China's restriction. But before we go into China, perhaps you could give us a global scenario of rare earths. I mean, from what we understand, of course, China has the bulk of rare earths in the world. And because they are becoming more and more intensively used in various kinds of technologies, everything from mobile phones to defense, the supply chain of these materials are very, very critical. And the Chinese control, in some senses, over a bulk of this supply becomes a concern for the rest of the world.
Well, there are a few points which I think listeners would like to know about. China's control over rare earths and their supply chains has a long history. Almost 35 years ago, Deng Xiaoping famously said that West Asia has oil, but China has rare earths. Now, actually, many countries have rare earths, and the availability of the rare earth minerals in any country, by and large, depends on the territorial extent of the country. So, wherever there is a country has more land, there will be more rare earths. And these rare earths are certainly not rare. They're called rare because when they were first discovered about in the late 18th century, they were very rare. They were uncommon and only found in some small regions in Scandinavia. That's why they were called rare, but they're actually very common. Cerium, one of the rare earths, is the 24th most common mineral in the Earth's crust. It's far more widely spread than, say, something like tin. So China realized that these rare earths, which are very close to each other chemically, there are about 17 of them, and they're very close to each other chemically, but some of their magnetic and optical properties are very, very different. And this is what makes them very important for a large number of applications, especially defense applications like GPS, tracking systems, also sensors, holograms. It's a wide variety, and it would be difficult to imagine modern life without using devices that need these rare earths. Cerium, the one that I mentioned, which is a common one in the Earth's crust, is used, for example, in automobiles. Every modern car, the kind that you and I drive around, will have about 20 kilos of cerium in it. So it's not something that we can just laugh it away. Now, the thing about rare earths is that yes, they are common. Second, China has a big land area, and they found many of these rare earths within their own territory. China also imports a lot of ores from other countries after it has become a rich country. It is cheaper for China to import an ore from, say, Democratic Republic of Congo or some other place, and then process the ore within China. Now, the second aspect of these rare earths is that when you want to extract the pure metal from the ore, which is typically an oxide, the kind of chemistry that you have to do is extremely polluting. It spoils the water, it spoils the environment, it spoils the air, it spoils the flora and fauna around that place. And highly toxic and dirty chemicals are released into the atmosphere. China went ahead with all this in total disregard of environmental concerns, simply because the kind of government that is followed in China is of a type where, proper opposition to any of these things is simply not permitted or not allowed. So the other thing that they did was that when they began to extract the metal, in order to control the full supply chain, they didn't stop with obtaining the pure metal, but they continued on making the application that needs the metal. So you see immediately that they've got control of the whole supply chain. They can get the ore, they can extract the pure metal from the ore, and then they can make the application using the pure metal. So they have everything in their control. And you know that when a country controls the entire supply chain for any commodity, then it's as good as having a monopoly. And when I say there are 17 rare earths, please remember, Hindol, that there are therefore 17 independent supply chains. And so when you told me that China has prevented the export of 7 critical rare earths, I mean, it's a big blow for the country against which this thing has been employed. So these are some of the things. I mean, they do lots of other things. They have induced price shocks. They make metal somewhat artificially cheaper for some time, and then they jack up the price again. And the other thing which is not commonly understood by people is that many of their industrial policies have what is called this civil military fusion. So things that are required for the military purpose are often required also for civilian purposes. So they do not distinguish between production for civilian purposes and production for military purposes. And this gives them an enormous amount of flexibility because they're able to quickly transfer the product from the civil to the military side and vice versa. And technically and technologically, they are very superior. Would you believe it or not? The number of patents filed by China on the rare earth elements is more than the rest of the world put together. And they are aware of all the fine nuances of rare earth chemistry, which is actually very vital. I mean, all of us have heard of this metal called neodymium, which is the one of the 7 which China has prohibited. This neodymium is an essential constituent of the permanent magnets, which are required for the generation of electricity because in many ways they are supposed to be superior than the electricity that is generated by electromagnetic induction. So what is not so well known about these permanent magnets is that this neodymium requires a very small amount, 1%, of another rare earth called dysprosium. Now, dysprosium is one of these what is called heavy rare earths. Of these 17 based on atomic number, the ones with a higher atomic number are called heavy rare earths. Dysprosium is very, very rare and very, very costly. Until recently, it was believed that only Australia and to some extent the US even know that they have dysprosium. I mean, India might well have dysprosium, but we don't know if it's there or not. But anyway, so this dysprosium is required to make the neodymium heat stable. So without the 1% dysprosium, all the neodymium in the world that you've got is not going to be of much use. Now, surprise, surprise, guess where the Chinese found that there is a lot of dysprosium? This is in Myanmar of all places. which is near that, that opium triangle, that area in northern Myanmar. Apparently, there is dysprosium there, and apparently, we know very little about these things. China is taking away a lot of these ores from Myanmar and processing the dysprosium. So, you see, this is technically, scientifically, technologically a very tricky subject. It is not meant for amateurs, and it is certainly not meant for newcomers. They have had a lot of scientific background before they even got into all these things. I mean, just think about it. It's chemistry, geology, economics, geostrategy, geopolitics, everything. All these things come together.
Let me ask you a question. Dr. Desiraju. The US has been really fretting about this. There's been a lot that has been written about how the US needs to ensure that its supplies are kept intact and are not impeded by China. What do you think? How do you think the US will respond to this? How do you think other parts of the world should respond to this? And then we'll come to India. But how do you see the US responding to this?
Very relevant. Ironically, when China was a very poor and actually unknown country 60, 70, 80 years ago, the US had a lot of control over the rare earth supply chains in the world. There is an area in a desolate part of California which is actually called, I think, Mountain Pass. Mountain Pass is the name of the area in a very remote part of California. And this mountain pass contains large amounts of all the 17 rare earths. And America knew that it had these things as early as the 1940s. Until the late 70s, the US used to control most of the rare earth supplies in the world. Although, mind you, the variety of uses that these rare earths are capable of was not known at that time, but to the extent that we knew about rare earths and the US was supplying. Now, at the time when Richard Nixon made his détente with China, in order to sort of lend a helping hand to China, it was not altogether altruistic. As I told you, the rare earth technology and metallurgy is highly polluting. So the US was concerned about this aspect. What they really did was they gradually phased out Mountain Pass. And they allowed China into this area. I don't believe they actually exported their ores to China. I think they allowed China to do whatever it wanted. But the US gradually came out of this business because of the so-called environmental concerns. And now I believe that it was actually in the term of President Biden that they decided that they need to reactivate Mountain Pass again. There's still a lot of rare earths there. It's one of the few areas where Biden and Trump are on the same page. And they now realize that, what a mistake they have made in allowing China to assume this dominant position. And of course, the US will fight back, as it always has done. But there's going to be a time lag before it ramps up to the level that China is able to do today. And during this interim period, I'm afraid to say China will still be in the driver's seat. As far as other countries are concerned, Russia must surely have a lot of rare earths, but because of the secrecy and the bureaucracy controlling much information coming out from Russia, I don't think we really know how much of each of these things they have. And the other thing I should emphasize is that once you know you've got a rare earth, the metallurgy is not particularly complicated in terms of chemistry. It's just that it's very polluting. And so many countries in principle can it can do this. Australia is another country which is of large land area and therefore having a large number of rare earth ores, oxides. And Australia also to some extent knows uh, what rare earths it has and where. I've mentioned dysprosium already. There is a company there called Lynas, Lynas, in Australia, which is practically a world leader in this field. And also, Australia has got a large area of uninhabited territory right in the middle of the country. So, in principle, picking some place where they can, do the rare earth metallurgy should not be difficult. Even so, they have outsourced some of the metallurgy operations to Malaysia. So, a bit of this is also going on there. I would say that the field is very active. People know that they cannot allow this Chinese monopoly to continue forever. And I think China also knows that the other countries will not give it this advantage forever. So whatever it tries to do in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, it will try to get the maximum benefit out of this rare earth monopoly in terms of its geopolitical activities.
We also ask you, the moment you said Myanmar, of course, it all adds up and it makes perfect sense. Many people believe that the conflict in Myanmar, the so-called civil war, is continuing not only because of, internecine violence, communities and groups not being able to get together with one another, long-standing, persistent political issues, but there is also a material aspect to this. And this material aspect, one of the key issues is China's intervention for exactly this, rare earths and other minerals available in Myanmar, which under the guise of a civil war can be extracted and transported far more easily than perhaps during quote unquote peacetime. How do you see this?
Well, you run the channel on geopolitics, so you will clearly know more about this than I do in terms of examples. But what I will say as an underlying theme in all this is any geopolitical consideration, it is the economic factor that comes first. Based on the economic factor, any number of tribal conflicts, or let us say in India, caste conflicts, or some other place, religion conflict, these things will always be retro-engineered by the powerful countries that stand to gain and lose through these economic wars. All wars, Hindol, I believe today we talk about cognitive war, and our book on supply chains, which is going to come out on October 18th, my publisher tells me, India's supply chains in a world at war is what it's going to be called. We have a full chapter on the rare earths. Now, any kind of issue that involves these metals, you can take it for granted that the primary consideration is economic. There are no friends and no enemies. Each country wants to preserve its economic interests. And so when you say there are 28 countries in Myanmar and so many tribes, if there was no dysprosium there, then there would not be these 28 tribes, or at least they wouldn't be fighting with each other. It would be the easiest thing for America, China, even India to stoke all these rivalries. And so I believe economics comes first, and all these other things are only consequences. If you talk about it as a war strategy.
Yes, that's right.
And if you say that, if you take it in terms of there is a policy.
Yeah.
Let us say there's a policy, and then there is a strategy, and then there is tactics. So what you're talking about comes in the intersection, I would say, of strategy and tactics. It comes somewhere there in that area. I'm using the classical description of war as, say, Clausewitz or something. So I suppose you take that kind of interpretation. And so the overlap between strategy and tactics is what is happening in Myanmar.
Let's talk a little bit about India as we come towards the end of this conversation. How does how does the Indian scenario look to you? Because India wants to become a great manufacturing power. One of the biggest things we are manufacturing of late is, of course, mobile phones, and there are many other things. Automobiles you mentioned. We also need a sustained supply and a resilient supply chain in these minerals and materials. How do you see this from an Indian vantage point?
Um, there are good points and bad points. I think we learned our lesson with copper, and I think we will not allow something like that to happen again. Although we have talked about copper before in your program, that was a devastating blow. We lost on all counts, and we simply cannot afford to make that kind of mistake again. Now, with regard to rare earths, I will only say that there are two aspects to this. The fact that this metal thorium, which is not a rare earth at all, was so vitally important for our atomic energy program starting in the 1950s and more properly in the 1960s. Much pure thorium was available in a single beach in Kerala, the famous monazite sands near Thiruvananthapuram. And by a whim of nature, those sands also contain a large amount of rare earths, which included cerium, lanthanum, especially some of the lighter rare earths, I would say, occurred in that beach. Now, because of improper application of mind, the entire aspect of this beach initially, and then subsequently all the minerals and materials that were available in that beach were made the sole property of the Department of Atomic Energy, simply because thorium was required by them. So in a blanket thing, what they did was that all the rare earths that have nothing at all, they have 0% to do with atomic energy. Let me say that confidently. All these rare earths were brought under the purview of DAE. And they went further into the matter and founded something called Indian Rare Earths Limited, IREL, a body that still continues till today. So you can imagine this kind of, I would call it just misstepping or flat-footedness. You have a whole department of atomic energy dealing with metals that have no relationship with atomic energy whatsoever. And as a result, it became very difficult for anybody else to even think about prospecting or forget mining, even trying to find out where rare earths are located. Remember what I told you right at the beginning of the program. Any country that has a large surface area will have lots of rare earths. So there are rare earths all over India. I have no doubt about that, including the heavy rare earths. But we just don't know where they are simply because DAE was in charge of the whole thing. So that is the first mistake. And that, I think, cost us 20, 30, 35 years. It got into the babudam of the DAE. And they were basically not interested in these rare earths because it has nothing to do with their main mission, which was and is and will still be only thorium. So, I mean, that was the first problem. The second problem is because of this time delay, we have no scientific base in rare earth research. I am a chemist myself. If I was asked to name a prominent Indian inorganic chemist, who made a name for himself or herself doing rare earth chemistry, I would not be able to come up with a single name. So this is bad, which means that even at the academic level and so on, people were not encouraged, or these even small research projects were not funded. Our lack of knowledge of rare earths is quite profound, actually, scientifically speaking. They forget the technology and all that. So now, suddenly, because of this embargo and this Bajaj Auto, and they say their production lines are going to be idle starting in August because of this ban of neodymium import. Now, suddenly the political class or the chatterati have started becoming interested in rare earths. It's become fashionable to talk about it. But what can I say? I mean, there's so many things that could have been done. Even smaller countries, especially in Europe, have got solid chemists who are specialists in rare earth chemistry. We don't have a single one of them in India. So, I mean, it's a sort of a lack of an awareness. And I mean, all that set aside, as a chemist, let me say that rare earth chemistry is very interesting academically. Forget any commercial application. There are things that many people could have done which would have gotten them very nice papers in standard research journals and all that. Nothing. We don't have anything. I mean, my department in the Indian Institute of Science, one of the famous and most well-known chemistry departments in the country, we don't have a single person whose main line of research is rare earths.
Let me ask you, all these problems obviously exist. Going forward, to fix our supply chain, what should India do? In a nutshell, what should India do to fix the supply chain now that all these problems exist and China is weaponizing the supply of rare earths?
Right. And my action plan, which we have highlighted in our book, there are 17 rare earths. Pick 3 of them. One which is one of the light rare earths, which is more plentiful, which is also required in larger quantity, which will be cheaper to extract, and develop a whole supply chain around that metal. Other countries may also do it, doesn't matter. But if you have your whole supply chain for this first metal, that is one way of going about it. The second, take another rare earth which is of moderate availability, not very plentiful, also useful for a few things, not very critical and certainly not strategic, but useful for non-military purposes. And so that you're hedging your bets. You take an easy one, then you take a moderately difficult one, and develop your full supply chain around that second. And finally, go for the risky thing, a heavy rare earth. And here I would say the obvious choice would be dysprosium, which is not at all commonly found, very difficult to extract, and then try to develop a small niche here, because China has something, Australia has something, USA has something. So if we could get into dysprosium, for example, that would be very important, because as I already told you, you need that 1% of that dysprosium for the neodymium magnet. So I think you have to select 3 of them. My number is 3. And how do you select? It cannot be IAS Babus first. They should be prohibited from entering this meeting. Prohibited. And the thing should be taken by a decision, should be taken by a group of economists political science strategists, scientists, technologists, lawyers even, but no IAS people. The decision of such a committee, which will be a fully technical decision, should be then handed over to the ministers, and then they are free to do whatever they want by giving it to the IAS people and tell them this is what needs to be done in so and so time scale. You do it. So what the IAS person will have to do, he also has a job, because the ore can be taken from anywhere to anywhere in India or anywhere in the world to India. I mean, China is extracting rare earth ores from the bottom of the ocean near the Maldives, where the Prime Minister went yesterday. So we are going to Maldives for some reason, but they are going to Maldives for many, many reasons. One of these being these rare earth ores at the bottom of the sea. So let the IAS officer decide where we are going to process these ores, because he knows best where the political opposition will not be able to. You have to take a BJP ruled state. It has to be no population. Let them worry about all that, because we don't know about that aspect. And let them decide where the MP or the MLA is not going to interfere, or at least silence the MP and the MLA not to interfere. Because the rare earths is a project of vital national security. Military, economic security is at stake here. So if you ask me, I think the responsibility should be given in different stages to different people, with the minister having overall responsibility, because he is the person whom we voted to power. So he bears the overall responsibility for the decision. But he should be sure that this, let us say, metal A, metal B, metal C, how are we sure that these choices A, B, C are correct? Only with a committee of the type I mentioned. And it should not be decided by people who are not competent to decide this. I think I'm making myself clear enough.
Absolutely. Excellent. I hope, some of the suggestions you've given really come to pass and India gets its act together on the critical rare earth mineral space and the geopolitical war, and to conquer and in a sense capture as much of the rare earth supply chain as possible. We'll have to leave it at that. Dr. Desiraju, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for explaining these details to us. I really appreciate your time.
Hindol, I'm very happy to have been able to speak with you on a topic where I've been writing and speaking for almost 6-7 years. This is not the first time, and I hope that people who see this podcast will also feel like looking a little closer at our book on India's supply chains in a world at war, coming out on the 18th of October. And believe me, Hindol, this is war. This is war. Whatever definition you use of war.
Absolutely agree with you. I think truer words were never spoken. This indeed is war, and a lot of the future of war will, in fact, even the past of war has been about control of minerals and control of energy sources, and this will go on in a new domain as far as rare earths is concerned. Thank you very much once again for your time, Dr. Desiraju.
Thank you very much, Hindol. Pleasure as always.